Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy. So, what do you got for us today, Claire?
Today, we're going to go to Mississippi in the 90s. And I'm just going to start you off early on a Thursday morning on January 7th, 1993, when 5-year-old Yochi Boyd would head down to the road to her grandma's house like she always did to wait for the school bus. Only on this day, she would enter the house and find the bodies of her aunt and grandma, 49-year-old Verline and 82-year-old Betty Boyd.
How old was she?
5.
Poor baby.
Now, when the school bus arrives, Yochi went and told her bus driver, I can imagine, it's scary, who then followed the little girl back to the house to discover the bodies, or one body, in the doorway. Naturally, the DeSoto County Sheriff's Department would be called out to the house. It's just after 8 a.m. They would walk into the house and see that the whole place was in shambles. The front door was open with Verline's body in the doorway. A partially bloody shoe print went from the porch on the threshold, and then not far from her body laid 82-year-old Betty's body in the living room. Now, it was during this walk through the house that they would find a third body, the naked body of 13-year-old Evangela Boyd.
Oh, God.
She was in the laundry room. Now, 82-year-old Betty had multiple chop wounds to her head. One wound ran from her forehead to her chin and was 4 inches deep, where that was clearly a fatal injury. She also had several other wounds to her face, skull, hands, tons of bruising, and a fractured jaw.
Oh, God.
Yeah, now, there's no doubt that the force exerted was tremendous, and that was Betty. Verline had also died of chop wounds to her head that lacerated her brain. She had defensive wounds to her hands, fingers, and arms. Her injuries supported the theory that she held up her hands to protect her neck, head, and chest, but was repeatedly hit with something clearly sharp, think an axe or a machete. And just like her mom and grandma, Evangela, 13-year-old little Evangela, died of chop wounds also sustained to her head. The killing blow was to the back of her head and was over 7 inches long.
Oh, my gosh.
She had scrapes on her back, her knees, and her hip. More chop wounds to her forearms and her hand. One on her hand was so severe that it severed her thumb and fingers off her right hand.
Oh, God. Poor baby.
Now, although Evangela was naked with her bra pulled up over her head, there was no evidence of sexual assault. Now, I know I've painted a pretty horrific scene for you, but you remember when I was telling you the shoe prints that were that were in the threshold?
Yeah.
Well, they were partial bloody footprints in the house, but then also some more partial shoe prints coming off a dirt road, coming like the direction of the house. Now, as they started backtracking, it starts to rain, so it's a race against time at this point to get the shoe impressions photographed and also cast some of them in plaster, so that way they've got their evidence collected. The shoe print path would lead to the home of 24-year-old habitual offender Sherwood Dwayne Brown, who lived with his parents just several fields from the Boyd home, roughly a quarter mile away. Naturally, when the footprints lead that direction, police want to talk to that resident. But Sherwood wasn't home, and officers really wanted to talk to him. Being a habitual offender, I feel like they were like, let's talk to this feller.
Yeah.
So they call him up and said that the authorities need to talk to him. He says he's at work, so police are like, okay, well, we're going to head over there once we're done over here. Now, when they get over there, Sherwood's manager would tell the officers that he just dropped Sherwood off at the bus station. Now, it's just after 5 p.m., and now it's during this conversation that one of the officers who's like just looking around noticed a shoe print on the floor of the warehouse that looks a whole lot like the shoe prints they've been walking around around the Boyd home. It's also roughly around this time that they get word from a local pawn shop owner that Sherwood purchased a gun that same day.
Oh, wait. I thought they weren't killed with a gun.
They weren't.
So what's he need a gun for?
But I'm just saying, now he's armed. He was told the police wanted to talk to him.
Oh, he bought the gun after he found out.
Right. Righto. And he's beating feet. It's looking like now he's armed.
He ain't going down without a fight.
So in an effort to locate Sherwood, they check his wife's house and then at his girlfriend's house.
What?
Either. I know. I did the whole, wait, what? This fella lives with his parents, has a wife and a girlfriend?
He could probably live on his own if he'd lose the girlfriend and keep the wife.
Well, I haven't gotten there yet, but he's also got 2 children. So I feel like he's living at home because he can't afford anywhere else.
Well, it turns out if he keeps it in his pants.
But that's a spoiler alert because I haven't gotten there. Turns out if he would apply that to work, he'd probably have, we're not there yet. So don't get ahead. But he's not in either place. So they start checking around town at local hotels. And then they find a motel just off the highway had a Sherwood Jones. I rolled my eyes at that alias because Sherwood Jones instead of Sherwood Brown. And this Sherwood Jones in the hotel had used his wife's address.
Sorry. He's a genius.
Now, he was checked in, but he wasn't at the hotel. So they're still
looking for him.
He's around there somewhere. They're looking for him.
Sniffing around.
Now, just a little bit about Sherwood.
He lived in Sherwood Forest. Every time you say Sherwood, I think of Sherwood Forest, just so you're aware.
All right. But him and his wife had met in like the 89, 90 realm and got married in 1990. Sherwood had 2 boys with his high school girlfriend. Now, I don't know if that's the same girlfriend that they went to check to see if he was over there or not.
I would hope that she moved up the tier to the wife.
No. So the 2 boys that he had with his high school girlfriend is a separate person than his wife, Angela. I think it was one of those, if he was young, had 2 kids with his high school girlfriend that, you change a lot from high school to your 20s, I would hope. But anyhow, I don't know if when they check the girlfriend's house, if that's like baby mama or if that's 3 different ladies, but it doesn't matter.
I'm sure his wife disagrees with you.
Now, Angela and Sherwood were in the process of working towards getting their own place. So at one point, Angela and Sherwood lived at his parents' house, but Sherwood's mom had an alcohol problem paired with a bad temper, so it led to lots of nasty arguments where police would be called out. It was just a hostile environment. So that's where Sherwood would never live anywhere other than at home. So I think he just liked the way his mom did his laundry.
Sure. That's all she did.
So that meant that the sheriff was coming out pretty regular. And not only did Sherwood grow up with that being a thing, it also led to him not only getting in fights at home, but also at work. So he would also get fired from just having confrontations with either his coworkers or his supervisor. So he's just...
real nice feller to hang out with.
It's just a pattern there. So I don't blame his wife for being like, yeah, so I'm going to move out and we can work towards getting a place, but I can't be here.
I feel like it'd be the girlfriend or possible girlfriends that would make me be like, yeah, so I'm out.
So at that point, the police are looking all over to find family members or friends that could know where Sherwood is. So it's now Friday and they spread the word around the PDs and local area or like surrounding areas that they're on the prowl for Sherwood. And since he has more relatives and contacts in the outskirts, that they make sure everybody's on the lookout for Sherwood. And that he's wanted in connection with a triple homicide, and he's considered armed, and also has a history of violent behavior. Now, fast forward to it's now 6 p.m. Friday night. Sherwood would reach out to his friend James Coleman Jones, a.k.a. Chick Jones, and ask him to come to the motel.
You say shit
now, Chick heads
Jones?
Chick, as in like a chicken without the N.
These names are crazy. Sherwood Forest and chicken. Got it.
That's Chick. Chick heads over and knocks at the door, but Sherwood isn't there. Then he sees him peeking around the corner, and Sherwood explains that he's on the run from the police, and he had to make sure no one was following him. So they sneak into Chick's car, Sherwood hiding in the back seat, and head over to Sherwood's wife's house. They pick up her, that Angela that is, and then drive around and then drop her back off. I thought that was real weird because...
she's giving blowjobs.
I wasn't going there. I figure like she jumped in the back, and since he's been arrested before, I feel like when he pops up in the back seat, she's like, what the fuck? Drop me back off. I don't want any of this, is the way I pictured it, because as soon as they pick her up, they're dropping her back off and then decide, okay, let's just head back to the hotel. So they head back to the hotel. When they get there, Chick and Sherwood start talking. Sherwood would tell Chick that he had knocked on the Boyd home, and 13-year-old Evangela answered. So he goes inside into another room where he starts talking to her and feeling on her.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, he thought Betty was supposed to be at church, but she wasn't. And when she saw Sherwood rubbing up on her granddaughter, she starts screaming at him, and the two start arguing. Sherwood panics, grabs a Joe blade, and hits Betty.
What's a Joe blade?
Have no earthly idea. Try to Google it. I'm just going to picture it's like some sort of machete.
Or he took Joe blade away.
You're an idiot. Now, apparently, Sherwood had been lusting after young Evangela for a while.
Do you know how old he is?
25.
Ugh. Sorry, continue.
Apparently, he had been overheard by a family friend saying to one of his friends when he saw Evangela, "I'm going to get me some of that." Now, the family friend was the family hairdresser. Family friend as well was Chick Jones's mom, Laura, that had overheard him saying that he wanted
to tap that.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Now, she apparently pulled him aside and was like, "Dude, you should be ashamed of yourself," to which he smiled. So she said, "She's just a young child," and he responded that she was just ripe like a peach.
Ew.
Right? So after he killed Betty, he goes back over to Evangela and said he fucked her, but she was trying to fight back, so he beat her unconscious and continued.
Ew.
Now she would start to stir awake and started fighting him back again when she got cut. Then Sherwood heard the door shut and thought one of the Boyd boys was home. So he runs and hides behind the front door, and Verline comes in and he hits her on the back of the head. And then he sees Evangela trying to leave, panics, and he had to stop her, and he did. Then he walked the same path back to his house. Mind you, he's telling Chick this story while he's shaking, smoking cigarette after cigarette, even pulling the gun he had bought, pointing it at his head at one point during the story. Now, Chick tells him that he needs to turn himself in, and if he didn't, he was going to call the sheriff himself. But Sherwood already ditched the motel room. It wouldn't be until just after midnight on January 11th that Sherwood would be arrested at his aunt's house. Now, he was arrested wearing just his undies. He would point to his shoes that were in plain view next to the coffee table as being his and ask if he can put those on.
At least he didn't try to be like, "Those aren't mine over there."
Now, even though it was a cold night, they did not let him get dressed or put on his shoes since they knew the clothes and shoes could be evidence and didn't want to destroy anything. Now, I personally don't care. I say let him freeze, dirty little pig.
Yeah.
They would also find 2 guns and an axe in the house that they would take. Now, it shouldn't be surprising that when they get to talking to Sherwood, he denies that he was anywhere near the Boyd home and that he got to his parents' house Wednesday night around 8 a.m. and went straight to bed.
Sure.
But not before smoking some marijuana, drinking some beer, and maybe a hit of cocaine.
I don't do the drugs like that. Like, I don't do any of that. But it seems like it would contradict everything to do uppers and downers and just mix all the things.
Just drink your water.
Yeah. Hydrate. Take a milk.
I thought it was funny because when he's like, "I went straight to bed, but I smoked some weed and I drank some beer and I hit some cocaine," then that's not straight to bed.
No, it sure isn't.
But he also said he wasn't admitting to anything else, and you'd have to prove that he was anywhere else and did anything else, because that's all he's admitting to. Now, it was observed and photographed that wounds Sherwood had on his wrist and his finger, but he would say he got into a fight with his girlfriend, and that's how he got all scratched up.
I wish that when he was like, "I'm not confessing to nothing, you're going to have to figure it out for yourself," I wish one of those officers, just once, one of these times, would be like, "Challenge accepted, fucker."
Now, Sherwood would be arrested and indicted for the murder of Betty, Verline, and Evangela, but would plead not guilty.
Of course.
Now, remember those wounds on Sherwood when they brought him in for questioning? The prosecution believed that they could be bite marks that occurred when Verline was fighting back. Now, forensic odontologists would testify that it was possible, but it was a hot debate because then you have the defense being like, "Yeah, that's not a bite mark." And since it's not like a crystal clear impression of teeth, it's just like, it could be, it might not be.
Right.
But it was just that was open for debate, and the jury it would just depend on who you believe more.
Can't they do like dental check for his DNA in their mouths?
So we're in the 90s, and we'll get there. Now, the doc for the prosecution said the wound on the left wrist of Sherwood Brown is a human bite mark. It is a bite mark of great severity and is consistent with the time of the attack. The bite pattern is highly consistent with the definition of Evangela Boyd. So the shoes, or the shoe prints from the scene and inside around the Boyd home, were also subject to scrutiny. Now, shoe patterns are pretty amazing. They're almost like fingerprints. Each manufacturer has their own pattern, even down to each style and line of the shoe can be determined by the tread. Not only that, but everyone walks different and will wear that tread differently. So if you can get a clean shoe impression, then it's just like to match it to that person's shoe, it's unique. However, the shoe prints collected and photographed weren't clear. They were partial shoe prints, so it just leaves reasonable doubt because it's not a whole shoe print,
More like reasonable suspicion.
Well, but beyond the shoe prints, there was blood. His shoe tested positive for having had blood on the left shoe, but no evidence of blood on the right shoe. So there would be a motion to suppress the shoes as evidence entirely because the shoes were collected based on the shoe prints seen at the scene of the crime and without a warrant for the shoes. So when they seized them without a search warrant, they were saying that you can't put them into evidence because they took those, and Sherwood wasn't wearing them. Now, with that motion to suppress would also be including of any of the so-called matching prints, and confirmation of blood being present would also have to be thrown out. Now, the arresting officer would say they were advised that the shoes could be potential evidence and were seized just like his clothes were. Unfortunately, the courts would rule that the officers were not overstepping or treading on Sherwood's constitutional rights by seizing the shoes, so they would be admitted into evidence.
Good.
Now, on top of that, they have Chick Jones's testimony that he had confessed to him about the boy's murder. Now, all these things considered, the evidence and testimony, also the fact that Sherwood wasn't a person who followed a straight arrow path in life, collecting all his felonies, he was already serving a 15-year sentence in unrelated charges.
Wow.
Also, the fact that the killings were not only particularly atrocious and cruel, but were during the commission of a felonious abuse of a child, would result in Sherwood being found guilty of a capital offense. And on April 7th, 1995, he would be sentenced to death for the murder of 13-year-old Evangela and sentenced to 2 life sentences for the murder of her mother and grandmother.
Good.
Now, in 2012, the Mississippi Supreme Court granted Sherwood's request to test for DNA evidence. He would also be granted a new trial because the shoes that tested positive for blood ended up only showing presence of male DNA and not female, and only female DNA was found on the shoe prints in the Boyd home. Now, in 1995, DNA wasn't really understood or even really widely used yet, so since it was a new technology, none of the evidence had it tested. In addition to that, the swab of Evangela's saliva did not contain Sherwood's DNA, which would refute the claim that she bit him. There was also no DNA that came back from Angela's sexual assault kit. Now, her pubic hair and bra did contain DNA from at least 2 unidentified males.
Oh.
Now, there were no fingerprints in the home that belonged to Sherwood, or any hair or blood on his clothing that matched any of the victims. Now, the doctor who testified for the prosecution that the marks on Sherwood's wrist were most likely from a bite was found to be false. Not only that, but he had also testified in at least 8 other cases that ended up being overturned because of his testimony being inaccurate.
What the heck?
Which I was like, oh shit. Not only that, the testimony that was given by Chick Jones, who claimed Sherwood confessed to him, was found to have been provided in exchange for a more lenient plea agreement because he was being held on charges for theft. Not only that, side note.
I don't like your side note.
Not only did he get a more lenient plea agreement, but it was also dug up that the sheriff had animosity towards the family, but was also caught paying witnesses in other criminal proceedings.
Oh my gosh.
So Sherwood would say that they were coming for him, which is partially why he ran. So much so that he was frustrated that since they were coming after him specifically, they didn't bother to investigate that they had other suspects they could have looked at. Now, other names that came up was Reginald Martin, because Reginald had a history of violence and mental illness and apparently was in the area around the time the murders happened. There was also Tony Boyd, who was a relative. They didn't go into details of why his name was even brought up. On top of that, police failed to interview Sherwood's grandma, who had seen a white man in a ski mask in the woods not far from the Boyd's house. I'm not sure if they didn't bother to talk to her because it's a relative of his and she'll say anything. But then it would turn out that she didn't really even see that feller, but she heard it from somebody else. And then they find out there are neighbors who saw a man in black running into the woods around the murders.
Wow.
Which is like, what the fuck? Now, fast forward to October 2017. The Mississippi Supreme Court would overturn the convictions and death sentence, but Sherwood would remain in custody as the prosecutors had to have time to reconstruct their case against him. The next 3 years, they would utilize 4 different laboratories to retest the DNA and came up with the same results, while Sherwood sat and waited for his retrial.
That's messed up.
Well, I did the same thing. I was like, what the fuck? They get to sit there while they burn time? It's just his life is all. But then I was also like, but if they do any testing and he is found guilty.
Yeah, but how many additional times did they test the DNA? You said 3?
Well, 4 different laboratories.
Right.
Over the next 3 years.
Because they didn't get the results they wanted. They decided they'd just keep trying again, hoping that something would change. That's messed up.
Well, in August 2021, the motion to dismiss charges against Sherwood would be granted. He would be exonerated of all charges and would be released after serving 26 years on death row.
Oh my gosh. I hope he sued the pants off them.
The prosecution indicated they do not intend to retry this case, which I personally am devastated because when I started this case, I did not realize he had been exonerated. So I was just like, this is disgusting when I heard whatever was being talked about. And then when I found out, like when I started to read further and found out that Chick Jones feller was made that shit up, and then it was his mother that said she heard him talking about how he was going to get a piece of Evangela. I hope that if they made all of that up, they both find a special place in hell. Because if he didn't say any of that, I feel bad for Sherwood, but it's just like, who makes that garbage up?
Well, and the officer that was paying people.
Well, and then I think of that one case that I did where it was the village idiots and people jump on board when they think they're trying to put somebody in jail that needs to be put in jail.
Yeah.
So they'll make up anything because they think they're helping, when in reality, it's not help.
Well, it doesn't help, though, if the police are paying people to be witnesses. Did they sue? I hope he sued.
I would hope so. It threw me off. That's what was like threw me, because that horrific murder is unsolved.
It's still unsolved.
Right. So because they were gunning for Sherwood as they knew he did it and came at him so hard and hit him with everything they got to do, pretty much anything to get a conviction, they botched it. It's so, 26 years.
Shouldn't they have enough evidence or like DNA evidence at this point that, granted, it's not justice served because it's been 26 years, but
I don't know at this point. I was devastated.
That's awful.
Because when I was writing it, I was having some mad hate for Sherwood.
Yeah.
And then when I was just like, whoa, what the fuck is all this?
I didn't see that coming.
I know. That's why I opted not to rewrite my beginning, because I was like, I was also horrified at the details of the way the 3 of them died. That was so much force. They basically had their skulls split the fuck open. Can you imagine all the blood flung everywhere?
No, I can't.
And then part of me thought about it that, now mind you, if the police station people, all that, the detectives were any sort of dirty and fed Chick Jones information to be able to have his testimony to get Sherwood put in jail, they could have fed him enough to get him to tell whatever
version,
whatever story.
Yeah. Wow.
But at first, when I was just like, why didn't they look at his ass? Because that seemed like he knew some things.
Right? So for the family of all the people that were killed, is there anybody left?
They're not investigating.
Right, I understand that, but is there anybody, because you said it was the little girl and then the two other women, but are there other family members that survived that? I know they weren't part of the attack, but
I was going to say, everybody died.
how insane for them, though. You know, the person that you think did it spends 26 years in prison only to be released and you're told they didn't do it, but there's no way to find who actually murdered three of your loved ones in a brutal way. It wasn't like it was a peaceful death in any way, shape, or form. Not that I can think of a very great way to murder people, but that's so sad.
It's sad. It did shake my trust in law enforcement. Not to say all law enforcement are bad, but I think in any profession you can have people who are dirty. But it's just like, this case, it shook me a lot of bit, because I didn't see it coming.
No.
It sounded like they had a case, and then I was just like, oh, what the fuck? And then it blows my mind that somebody committed an absolutely horrific murder and did not get caught.
Yeah.
And really, they were most likely living there. So
I wonder if there were any more crimes similar to that happened before or after.
dude, that's what I was curious of, because
they got away with it.
it just seems wild to me. They didn't find a murder weapon. So that's part of like you got nothing there. So, which is why they really don't know. It's just clearly something real sharp. But then it threw me, and now mind you, during the trial, the judge refused to allow it into evidence as a defense, is that the DNA on the 13-year-old, that she was already sexually active.
Jeez.
Because it is Mississippi. So he's just like, you're not going to start disparaging victims. And clearly, what was going on there wasn't consensual.
Wow.
It just made me real sad for everybody, because obviously everybody died with a hit to the head, but
that's brutal.
It was not a quick...
I wonder if it was a machete, because to go basically down the entire length of your face, I don't know.
Well, either that or a real tall person. And just every bit of what they had. It's just a lot of rage.
Well, for the one that had from the forehead down to the chin and it was 4 inches deep, that's a lot of bone. So whatever weapon,
right,
that's got to be thick, because the number of times we've done cases where knives and stuff break off, I would think it's either a machete or an axe, like a wide axe.
When they said 4 inches deep, I was like, the amount of force that came down with that was just like, that is
disturbing.
Whoever bursted in there has some serious issues.
That poor little girl.
I was just, yeah. That was your case. I was all excited, and then I was disappointed because I wish I could say it was solved. I mean, I guess for Sherwood's sake, it did rattle my brain hole, because, man, is it easy to consider evidence if you really want somebody to be guilty? That to skew it how you want it.
Yeah.
Although I guess it also helps paying people to say what you want them to say.
I know you're not going to know this, but I wonder if there were any other repercussions for that officer. I doubt it.
Probably not. But so then it ends up being one of those, if it turns into a thing, you figure any and all cases he'd have his hand in, those are all going belly up.
Yeah, they all need to be researched and looked into, because...
Which, not to say that they shouldn't, but then it did shake my thought process on the death penalty, because he very nearly lost his life. Because if they would have done anything more quickly in terms of the death penalty,
yeah,
he was on death row.
Well, I think that's why they give him so many appeals, and it is stretched out. Like, I know we've complained before about how it took 30, like your one case where it takes 30 years for him to get to the actual chair or needle or wherever they're...
I still say, when it's in, like, I think there should be contingencies.
Like what? Because as far as we were aware, until 5 seconds ago...
I know, because when you can't account, Sherwood should die. Like,
yeah, and then turns out he didn't do it.
Yeah, I know, and you can't even trust your eyewitnesses.
Turns out they got glass eyes that were paid for by them crooked cops.
Yeah. Well.
Wow.
That's all I got for that.
I didn't see that coming, so thank you.
Didn't like it.
I thought for sure you're going to be like, he didn't done do it when they ran that DNA. Instead, it was his brother or somebody else. But to be unsolved, that's, I think, what makes it the most horrifying.
I'm devastated.
It's horrifying. Whoever did that got away with it. And I would seriously be curious to see if any of the surrounding areas had any other violent murders before or after. Because whoever did it felt kind of on top of the world because they got away with it.
Right. And the fact that, like, those kind of injuries, I would assume somebody's clothes should have been covered in blood.
Somebody's clothes were covered in blood. What year was that?
The 90s.
Yeah. So it's a very real chance that whoever did it is still alive and kicking. Well, I'm going to guess whoever did it, they should rerun the evidence or the DNA and see if they get any hits on the...
So, from when I've done cases before, when it's like the whole, when they try the wrong person the first go round, it's almost like they're so beaten and like trying to arrest and stick it to the person who did the next time. It leaves a huge hole of doubt, and as it should, because you fucked it up the first time. So it's almost like they leave it alone because...
Well, that's why I was asking
it's tainted.
Well, that's... You said tainted.
You're a child.
That's why I was asking if the females that were murdered, if they had any living loved ones, because without someone to fight for some sort of justice...
Yeah, an advocate.
Yeah. Because it sounds like they don't have one, and that's why it's taken a back seat to being solved, which is disturbing.
Yeah, well, and I think that is the case. And then they're also looking at, they've got other cases that haven't had any light shed on it. And it's been so long, they're either already have the person in custody on another offense, because let's face it, it probably wasn't a one-time crime committed. So they're either already in jail on something else, so why waste any more time on it? And either that or they're dead because they clearly live a violent life.
One can only hope.
I do. I hope they got hit by a car immediately afterwards, so the blood on the clothing got, mixed up, and they didn't look into it, and they're dead. They were dragged across the pavement and then died when the flagpole went up his ass. Like, just something...
What?
Real, I don't know. Like,
I know you don't know.
Pulled through the air and got shish kebabbed and exploded from the inside.
All right.
That's what I hope happened.
So what I'm hearing is you and my husband should never come up with ways to kill people or torture. Mine wants to hire a dentist.
All right.
In the Salty Nuts case, remember? He's like...
Oh, I didn't remember that one. I blocked it out.
Well, whenever... So, the case I...
He wants to hire a dentist.
The case that I researched...
Did you tell him what it's a doctor for?
One of the cases I was researching, I was watching a documentary. He was researching something on his phone. Something completely different. And they were... talking about a case, and he got roped into watching the documentary with me, and he's like, they did what? And he's like, I'll tell you what, if somebody did something to my daughter, I'm hiring a dentist to torture them. I was just like, what? It doesn't even make sense. But
he's had a bad experience.
But well, thanks for that, Claire.
That's all I got. I already said that's all I got earlier.
Okay, goodbye. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind-fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.